Hello, my name is Trevor Bissert, and I did my project on the differential functional connectivity of the anterior and posterior hippocampus. So the hippocampus aids in linking and remembering experiences by forming general representations of the world around us, and previous research suggests that there is a functional specialization between the posterior and anterior hippocampus, such that the posterior hippocampus is functionally specialized with specific memories, and the anterior hippocampus is specially functionized in general memories. We can think of specific memories as memories of your individual dog or your friend's dog or any dog that you know in specific with a name. And we can think of general memories as an overall schematic of a dog so that when you see a dog on the street, you can recognize that it is a dog and not a cat. So our mission of this project was to see if anterior and posterior hippocampal connections differentially support memory specificity and memory generalization by doing a whole brain connectivity analysis alongside behavioral tasks. So for this study, individuals completed several measures of memory specificity and generalization inside and outside of an MRI scanner, and we gathered the scores on these individual tasks as well as taking measurements of brain activity level. We were able to measure functional connectivity using activity measurements and correlating them between the anterior and posterior hippocampus to find significant neural connections. We predicted that the anterior and posterior hippocampus would be connected to distinct brain regions, and that the anterior hippocampal connections would be associated with memory generalization, and that the posterior hippocampal connections would be associated with memory specificity. Our results from our whole brain connectivity analysis showed that the posterior hippocampus and the anterior hippocampus both have functional connections throughout the brain with very little overlap, as we had predicted. And when we looked at our connections that predicted success in behavioral tests, we found that there were actually no connections that reliably predicted memory specificity success, but that there were connections in both anterior and posterior hippocampus that predicted generalization success. Perhaps most interestingly, we found that there were connections between the anterior hippocampus and the inferior frontal gyrus related to memory generalization success, which is a region that is usually seen to support memory specificity. We also found numerous connections from the posterior hippocampus that supported generalization success, such as with the temporal pole. So to conclude, we found that posterior and anterior hippocampal regions form distinct functional connections with very little overlap, and that our predictions were not confirmed as both anterior and posterior hippocampal connections predicted generalization, and that there were no connections that predicted memory specificity. The reason for this could be that this is an extension of an ongoing study in which we had a small number of participants, which gave us a low power for this specific analysis. Though we may not have found any connections that predicted memory specificity in the posterior hippocampus, that doesn't mean that there are none and that they couldn't be found in further studies done with larger powers. Thank you for listening.